client because the client wants to sell it. So there's a slight difference in terms of how the approach works today. It's changed from campaigns to narratives. I mean, all the people here who are from marketing, advertising, PR backgrounds understand what a campaign is. So this is not about campaigns. It's not about showing somebody a picture and saying, buy this. It's about telling a story. And telling a story is slightly different because you're telling a story with some passion, with some conviction, with some ethos, with something that you're actually putting behind that story. And a story is more difficult to sell. It's easy to put up a picture like this and say, buy this car. It's much more difficult to make a story out of this and sell it to somebody. And that is the age that we live in now. The communications landscape has changed completely. I mean, look at this. This is what people do nowadays in their free time. More and more Indians are doing this. Now with 3G coming into India, and it's being tested out by a couple of companies, by January, February, we'll have 3G enabled phones. Everybody will be able to communicate freely. You don't need a computer for that. You don't need a laptop. You just need a handheld device and everything will work. And in this world, there's constant conversations, constant chatter. People are talking to each other, sharing ideas, talking about this narrative that I was mentioning earlier. There's this whole new way to approach business. So we need to use our expertise, insights, analytics. We need to talk to people. We need to be able to understand what's going on in a conversation. So in the English language, there's a very slight difference between talking to somebody and talking with somebody. So I think, when we are talking with somebody, you're basically hoping that the guy understands what you're saying. When you're talking to somebody from a different perspective, you're trying to involve that person in the conversation. And we need to be able to involve a person in a conversation. Otherwise, people's attention spans are so small. In fact, I have a slide somewhere later which tells you how small people's attention spans are. Most people, when they're listening to somebody boring like me talking today, you wouldn't want to listen beyond a point. So if I go on for like 30 minutes, maybe you'll be awake. But if I go on for an hour, I can be pretty sure you're not going to be awake. But that's what's going on with attention spans. And the reason why this is happening is because you've got all these other things happening in your life and many other things that I can't show you here. And this is real-time engagement. This is what the world order, this is what the new world order today is all about. And these pillars basically show us what's happening in the world. There's real-time conversation, which is people talking all the time. There's real-time communities, which is people getting together online and offline. So what we are doing today is an offline community. There's a community of people. Or there are hundreds and hundreds of people online communicating with each other. And then there is real-time content. So today when something happens, like the scam example, the scam first comes out on the internet. There are people blogging about it. There are people tweeting about it. There are people on Facebook. There are people on communities. And then from there it germinates and becomes a bigger piece of news. And then it gets picked up by television or print or other mediums. But it all starts with a conversation. And real-time conversation, which is people actually using this information to buy a product, buy a service. After all, we're in the business of marketing communications. So how do you get a customer to buy your product or service? By actually involving them in a conversation. So you don't go and tell them that I have a great car. You go and say, okay, this is the car. Why don't you try it out? So online, you can show them the car. You can let them experience the car. And then if they like it, they'll buy it. You don't do the old marketing hackneyed style of going to them and saying, this car is good, it gives you good mileage, because everyone nowadays is smart enough to understand the difference between good and bad. And that's the sad thing, because marketeers, organizations still haven't figured that their customer is far more evolved today than he or she was even 1 year ago. And it is not about 5 years ago. This is an example of how marketeers are actually using conversations. So Jim Kelly of ING Direct. ING Direct is one of the best examples of a business which is run online. It's an online banking business. And basically this is his quote, so I have not modified it. And in his quote, the word conversation comes twice. And I'm just trying to elaborate on why people like him are using the word conversation every time they say something, because they understand that they're in an age today which is about conversations. So, and taking off from there, I'll go into the next section, which is talking about the conversation economy and what that means for us. But before that, the competition for us And when I say competition for us, I don't mean for a PR person, but I mean in general, in marketing terms, the competition landscape is changing. In the old days, it was very straightforward. So you had an advertising guy, you had a PR guy maybe, and basically you had some guys who did things like events once in a while. But now, if you look at the way the businesses are structured, everyone's competing with everyone. So you've got a Facebook competing with an ad agency. You've got a Google competing with a magazine. You've got a Anderson, Accenture, BCG, McKinsey, all of them competing with everybody else. And what this is showing you is that on this axis, you've got technology-driven, data-driven, people-driven, and value-driven kind of businesses. And it's just showing you where each of them stand. And if you look at the internet companies now, they are more powerful than historical consulting firms would be. So everyone used to think McKinsey is this great institution. So every time a company needed a solution, they would go to McKinsey. Today, they don't need to, because everything that they want to know is available online, and they can find ways of getting that information. So clearly what started to happen is all the internet brands are starting to get into that zone where historically an ad agency would sit, or a PR agency would sit, or a consulting firm would sit. And that's the change in the paradigm that I was talking about. What this also means is that conversations are changing. People are talking to each other in different ways. You've got relationships that are being built online. People talk about a particular subject. There are people who discuss ridiculously personal things online, which you otherwise don't even talk to your friends about. Because somewhere when you need to sit down with somebody and talk to them, you feel embarrassed. But when you are not sitting with the person, and that person is just a virtual entity, you don't mind saying things openly. And that's, of course, it's got a downside, but it's also a very powerful tool. How do we harness the conversations that are going on? At the heart of the conversation economy, there's chaos, because basically this is chaos. This chart doesn't mean anything. It just means that there's a whole bunch of people talking to a whole bunch of people. In between that, there are brands. In between that, there are products. In between that, there are conversations going on. And basically, it's a 24/7 scenario. It's dynamic. It's constantly changing. It's real time. It's power to the people. It's social media. That's why it's called social media. It's fast. It's instantaneous. It's unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen. And the collapse of the traditional media environment is clearly upon us. Redefinition of the media environment. In the US, I mean, it's strange for people like us to believe this, but if you ever go there, you'll realize that people have stopped reading newspapers. India is a different market because we still have about 34% of the population of India who's not literate. So as long as we still have people who are not literate, and when they start becoming literate, they need to read. And when they need to read, they'll need to consume newspapers, magazines of some sort. But that may take another 30 years. But in the US, nobody reads anymore. Everyone's just got screens in front of them of different kinds. They talk on the same screen to their families. They read the newspapers off the same screen, and they do everything on the screen. So it's weird. But it's about anywhere, anytime, any device, any content. It's all there. And it can be customized. You can have it in your hand. You can have it in any format. You can be anywhere in the world. I don't know if you've heard of something called Foursquare. It's a specialized social media environment where you can actually sit in an environment and pretend that you're doing something. So strange kind of things which are happening in the world, and I think it's important for all of us to be aware. And the big shift is from a consumer to a community. I was talking about that earlier. The industrial age, traditional advertising was all about push the product, talk to a customer, hopefully they'll buy it. And the word was hopefully, because there was no scientific way of making sure that a customer would actually buy a product, except post-research. Clearly, here the brand speaks to the consumer. If the consumer gets the message, he buys it. The communication is one way. There is no discussion. And this is what we used to do till 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. A lot of companies even today are doing this. They haven't understood that what's going on is the brand is now synonymous with the individual. It is surrounded by people. And the idea is that how do you connect with individuals? How do you sell to somebody without obviously trying to sell? And then in the conversation age, it's even more complicated. And the brand needs to get in touch with people, and people need to get in touch with the brand. There are two-way conversations. So it's moving from a monologue, which is one guy talking, to a multi-log, which is everybody talking to each other. And in that kind of an environment, it's very difficult. It doesn't stop, and it's very difficult to sell a product. And actually, a lot of companies have not even crossed the first stage. And some have just gone from first to third without understanding the shift in the communication paradigm that's going on. The unmet expectations, the white space out there is huge. There are deeper ways of being able to engage a customer. In more places, offer relevance. And the real word that I want to bring out is relevance, because ultimately your product, your brand, your company, whatever you're trying to sell, has to be relevant. If it's not relevant, I'm not going to buy it. I'm not going to be interested in it. I'm not going to buy shares of that company if it's not relevant. And that's the part people don't get. People don't get about how to make a brand or a product or a company relevant to somebody else. And I've got another quote here, and that talks about how this works from a blog's point of view. So you know what blogs are. People are creating blogs and communicating with each other. So John Patel, about 3 years ago, said this. And people have been talking about a conversation economy even before this presentation that I made today. It's been going on for a long time. It's just that no one understood that it was out there. Everyone says conversation economy is here. And how do we need to do things in this new environment? So typically we need to do the same things in a conversation economy, but differently. How do we engage people in a conversation economy? What does it mean? So if you look at these arrows, it means time and information are the new currency. So money is out of the window, time and information, because you've got people who are millionaires, you've got billionaires, you've got trillionaires. Now what more money do you need? What are you going to do with all that money? But you don't have time. You don't have information. So you can be an Ambani or a Tata or anybody, but you don't want more money. You need this. You need to be able to connect. You need to be able to converse with people. You need to be able to create communities. You need to be able to create content. Any product needs to engage. Engagement with customers, engagement with groups of people is an absolute must. And why do clients hire us? Why do clients work with people like me? Because we offer value. Because we can bring those conversations to a client. Because we can bring engagement to the client. We can create communities for the client. And I'll talk about some case studies a little later which show you how companies, and I'm not talking about companies that we work for,